Uh, Thank you. I just want to thank the Holy Family University for giving me the opportunity to exhibit my work here at the gallery. This presentation is going to be a little 20-minute presentation just to give an overall view of what this exhibition encompasses and to give you some ideas behind my work, as well as introduce you to some of the materials and techniques that I've been using as well. So the Echo of Silence is the title of the show. And that came out of this idea of telling an untold story. And telling an untold story, particularly from my perspective, being from the Caribbean and functioning as an artist from the Caribbean and working in North America, particularly in the United States. So I'm going to start to talk a little bit about some of the themes, some of these themes in my work. And these themes actually find a place in both the history, the culture, and also in terms of my own personal engagement with the world. So the theme of space, there's the theme of displacement, memory, identity, and the theme of survival. So, and when we talk about survival, we're talking about survival in terms of creatively, but also a sort of spiritual survival, and also survival as it relates to history. And, I'll talk about that a little later on in the presentation. So I'm an artist from Trinidad and Tobago, and I presently reside in Atlanta, Georgia. So that my background is very much affected by the space, that space in which I came from. So this work itself is more than that, but it's about how that space shaped my own personal aesthetics. The Caribbean region, of course, is a region that is a very, very complex in terms of its history. At so many different times within that particular space and that landscape, so many different cultures have been present. There has been moments of existence of the first peoples, for instance. Then, we had the trauma of history, sorry, slavery, colonialization that also happened within the region. And now, we also have to confront this whole idea of globalization and what that means to Caribbean identity. So all of these factors, which is a very, very complex in so many ways, have more or less shaped my own personal aesthetic and how I understand the visual tradition and also the way in which I actually go about approaching my work. So when coming to the technique, I'm also dealing with how I manipulate those particular techniques in order to speak to those specific themes and issues that I just pointed out. So as I said, there's a lot of cultural influences within the Caribbean, but one of the first themes I want to talk about is the theme of displacement. And of course, displacement again arrives out of the historical realities of the space and the landscape of the Caribbean. Whether we're talking about people who were actually moved from the African continent and forced into labor, whether we're talking about displacement that has to do with the idea of colonialization and having to adopt a foreign way of expression, whether this is through language or other means. But displacement is one of the themes in my work that I very much interested in. And that theme of displacement is pretty much expressed through the idea of fragmentation. And one of the ways in which I'm able to do this is through, of course, drawing upon the abstract images. Like, for instance, in this image that is actually on the screen right now, it's actually called, this is a theme, judgment. And the forms that mirrored in the image here, they're in a way sort of reminiscent or rather reflective of, the landscape. And so what I wanted to do is to give a sense of almost the landscape that is actually breaking away almost. There's a sense of the moving away. So these forms are, in a way, they seem to be sort of dividing. But this, but the division itself is one that is also a little ambiguous, because what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to create that tension between this idea of breaking away, and also there's a sense of a harmonious relationship among these forms. I am able to achieve these tensions in the work through the application of these really heavy silhouetted forms. And the silhouettes, in a way, they almost contrast with the more sort of dynamic interplay of the lines and the shapes and more sort of three-dimensional aspect of the work. So there is a kind of ambiguity, almost a sort of contradiction of sort, that is seen through these very different ways of representing this idea, where the image itself, once it is escaping in a way, but at the same time, it is being held together by by that really heavy silhouette forms, and it sort of engulfs the entire visual image. So displacement is one of the important themes in my work. And of course, as I said, that goes back to the whole idea. And we can talk a little bit, we can go into conversations about that displacement and what it means for the Caribbean person as well. Now, the other theme is the theme of space. And this piece here is called Flying Mantis. And space is represented, when I talk about space, I guess I'm talking about it in terms of both time, a space that has to do with time, and time, of course, that can be temporal, but time also that measures in terms of historical time. But what exactly is time? So, to sort of confront this idea of time, I'm able to create these compositional structures that that has these sort of gestural types of marks, and the gestural marks and the spontaneity of the colors themselves, so that when I think of time, I think of both color, I think of gesture, but I'm also thinking about it in terms of time, in terms of layering. So the layering the images, building up the image and building up those forms, and where the colors seem to move in and move out of the different in terms of the surface of the work itself. That process of movement, shifting through these layers in the work themselves. And even within the layers, there's perhaps hints of images, somewhat representational. Sometimes they may be symbolic elements. And all of these sort of adds to that, mystery that I'm actually trying to create in the work as well. Because, the thing about time is, in a way, it is mysterious, because it can be immediate. It can be at the same time fleeting when we begin to think of time. So how do you represent time visually is one of the things that I'm actually very interested in. Now, the other theme is the theme of memory. All right. And again, I want to relate that idea of time to also memory, because there is a relationship, when we talk about time and memory. So, and they do share it. So memory is, again, represented through this series of depth. So in this painting here, and this is called Blue Diamond, this particular piece, when we talk about memory, we can allude to personal memory. That is memory that has to do with my own biography, for instance, or autobiography, right? Or it could be cultural memory, the cultural memory that has to do with the particular space in which I came from. Or it could be in a way, and that cultural memory of dealing with collective memory as well. So in this piece called Blue Diamond, I am actually in a way constructing these ideas of memory through the application of all of these distinct layers. I'm also using perhaps icons and their suggestions of other different cultural references in here. And of course, this goes back to the same idea that I talked about earlier on when I mentioned the idea of coming from a very diverse cultural space. So in the work, I'm able to use some of the symbols and imagery drawn out of these very different cultures, whether it's the Indo Trinidad culture, whether we're talking about African culture, whether it's the African and ancestral culture, all of these remnants that actually remain, and these symbols and ideas, visual ideas, these ideas are still actually present. And particularly in Trinidad, they sort of manifest themselves in Carnival, of course, which is that main festival. But at the same time, that festival itself, that becomes such a very sort of, it becomes the way in which like the signature almost for describing this experience of inclusivity, this experience of collaboration, this experience of bringing together peoples of very diverse backgrounds, but being able to create an experience or new experience that, we call that sort of national identity. So, yes, so the work is I'm able to use all of these different symbols and icons from these different places. So, and I guess that leads us into the idea of identity and what actually is in terms of we talk about the search of identity. When I exploring identity, I think I tend to use the mix between the figurative and the abstract. The figurative element I'm able to use so that it is sort of identifiable. It's representing, what a person looks like, and it sort of engages the audience in a way that they can identify with that individual or individuals. But these images are actually placed within a sort of almost with an abstract space. Sometimes that space itself can also be, in a way, they can maybe magical spaces. These spaces, they contain different abstract symbols. They sometimes they just have very much in terms of layers, so that the images are always situated within a space that is not of this world, so to speak, but they're more sort of like a psychological space. Because I think that that's the appropriate way in which to talk about the issue of identity, to talk about it not so much in terms of, yes, the physical representation, but identity does in fact have to do with more of that sort of emotional, psychological understanding of one's place. So in order to sort of answer some of those questions, or rather to explore some of these issues, I'm actually using these images as well. So this piece right here is called Haiti. And again, going back to this idea of identity and using use of the figures. And as I said, these figures seem to exist in a very abstract space. They're more sort of like psychological spaces, right? So the physical that actually exists within these psychological spaces. And this piece, as I said, is called Heat. And it was actually produced at the time where of the earthquake in Haiti in 2010 that devastated Haiti. And of course, Haiti has been one of those societies that, has been, traumatized in so many different ways throughout history, even though, Haiti, of course, we know was one of the first independent nations of that region. But the point here was in this particular piece was to pay homage. And this was actually taken from a newspaper of the images where these were people actually walking through the rubble. They were walking through the rubble and there was like dirt all on their faces, and it was a very horrific image to be seen. What I did is that I wanted to, in a way, pay homage to the people of Haiti, but also to demonstrate their strength and their resilience. When you are from nations with very little resources, there is a particular kind of resilience of the people. And but then also that resilience is one that, characterizes the region, the Caribbean region on a whole. And this earthquake and this devastation was felt. So the images actually created here was to, number one, to show the pain, but also the use of, the gold and that color is to attach the sense of their dignity. So there's a sense of dignity, there's a sense of pride, but then it's also a strength, a sense of resilience in that experience. All right, so this is another piece here, and it's called The Waiting Room. And again, in this particular piece here, you see the image of the mother and child. But then, of course, the space in which the mother and the child actually exist is one that is emotionally charged space as well. Okay, so ideas of space, ideas of identity, notions of displacement, all of these are very much prevalent themes in my work. So now what I want to do, I just want to talk a little bit about my style and the evolution of my style over time. And I'm going to go ahead and try to share this particular piece right here. Now, of course, for me, as an artist, I always very much interested in creating something that is new. I'm always looking at of new ways of expressing ideas. And I feel that that's one of the important aspect of an artist is that you're affected by your environment, you're affected by the space that you occupy, but also how you encounter experiences or places. So for me, this image right here is called In All Time. And what I wanted to do in this is to create an image that seemed to occupy the physical space. Okay, so the image itself, even though it's about being really actively engaged in the creating and the crafting of it. So not only do I want to create these shapes and play around with these forms, but I want to be physically engaged in doing that. So in this particular piece here, I in direct contact with the material itself and I'm cutting it away. So there's a sort of sculptural element that I'm working at. There's a sense of, it being craft, which of course, is drawn from ideas, particularly when we think of craftsmanship from, ancient artifacts and cultures. But this idea of where the image itself can be felt, where I can actually feel the surface and also applying these sort of tactile elements to the work. So sometimes what I'll do, I'll attach it, even though this is a paper, is mixed media, which is what mixed media, of course, it gives me that opportunity to do that. But then I would, I can put cloth on that, and then I can, put cords and all of these different tactile elements that I'm actually using in the work. Because what I want to do is that I think in the end, I'm really interested in making these images and these forms very present to the viewer. So they seem that they can actually move and enter into the actual physical space. Now, that idea, of course, is not something that is foreign to me. And I think what it is that I'm also taking that from the mass in Trinidad and Tobago, for instance, for Carnival, that mask making aesthetic, the use of the costume and creating these, very sort of provocative and very dramatic shapes and forms, and they are actually occupying the space. So, like growing up for me in Trinidad, I was able to witness the mass, these very sort of empowering images and the moving and moving image so that it was almost like, you know, and this is the way in which I described it. It's almost like a painting that literally came alive. In a way, this is one of the directions that I'm actually moving in my work. Also, I like to work very large. So scale is one of those things that I'm actually also using. So at the heart of it, though, is how to break those boundaries, how to give birth to the new idea. As I said, for me, there is a flexibility. I'm actually making the decision at the moment that feels right, or the decision where that particular expression just seems it should be the right expression. So whether I'm working with figurative elements or whether it mediates between the figurative and the abstract, however it is, or whatever I'm using at the moment, whether I'm actually building up on a tactile surfaces or creating, different layers just through paint, all of these ways in which I'm really manipulating the medium in order for me to reach at the expression I'm trying to reach. So I'm just gonna share this other piece here. This piece right here is actually in the exhibit. So again, this is one of the forms, as I said, where I in a way creating these two-dimensional forms, but I want to create them in a way where it merges with the three dimension, and then it occupies the physical space. So this particular piece is one where, as I said, it really takes its influence from the mass, or mass making, particularly as it relates to the larger display of mass in Trinidad and Tobago, which is where I'm from again. But also in here, you see a lot of layers, and it's almost like I'm building upon different images and forms. And I like that idea of constructing. So the idea of constructing is one, for me, there's a metaphor for it in terms of my own structuring or rather building on my own cultural experiences, but also in terms of that building of my these new technical awareness and trying to create work where I resolving it as I move along until it actually manifests and it becomes an image that I find to be compelling. All right. So this is definitely the way in which I function. So travel has been important. Travel for me really does affect the way in which, or has actually impacted my work. When you're in a different environment, you it feels different. You are able to really see yourself, within that environment because you become more conscious in so many ways. And I always find that compelling. So my travels to Athens, Greece, Colombia, a lot of the work that I actually created there was also very transformative. So I do like to inhabit very new and innovative different spaces so that, it does allow me to look at, my own work and my own experiences, both personal and cultural, in a very different way. So as a conclusion, the visual art tradition of painting and drawing have been used throughout to relay the narratives, of course, always of human culture. So its visual power has given rise to the very stylistic forms and expressions, and it all articulating lived experiences. So this exhibit includes a body of work that reflects the ideas of memory through experimentation of media and exploration of innovative techniques. It engages audiences in a conversation relating to identity and meaning, particularly within the diaspora of the Caribbean, Latin America, and the wider Western Hemisphere. So it adds to a body of work within contemporary art of the ongoing dialogue and debate into Caribbean cultural identity and its visual artistic tradition. So that's it. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much. That was really informative. Great. The work was
Thank you.
beautiful. Yeah.
Thank,
Luke
thank you
Life
for
and Gallery. Thank you.
thank you for having me.